Hello dear listener, welcome to another week of Sitting in a Bar in Adelaide. My name is Michael Persh. Great to have you with me. As always, if you're a regular listener to Sitting in a Bar in Adelaide, it was only a few weeks ago that I had bass player extraordinaire Bob Daisley on the show to talk about his new book, For Fact's Sake. And Bob has had an amazing career since leaving us in Australia back in the very early 70s. He went to London and he ended up playing with Richie Blackmore's Rainbow, with Chicken Shack, with Mungo Jerry, with Uriah Heep, but I guess most famously with Blizzard of Oz, that ended up being Ozzy Osbourne's band, and all the trials and tribulations that went through that. Bob Daisley has made some amazing music with some amazing musicians over so many years. He continues to do so. His book is called For Fact's Sake. You can get it from his website, bobdaisley.com. But I thought today, this year, 2013, is the 35th anniversary of Richie Blackmore's Rainbow's album Long Live Rock and Roll, which is the first recording that I remember hearing Bob Daisley on, and it was only after a couple of years that I found out that he was Australian, and I followed his career ever since. He's a wonderful fella, always very generous with his time. So as the book is out there, and lots of stuff, great stuff about Bob's career, and lots of stuff about his time in Rainbow, albeit short, with Richie Blackmore, the late great Ronnie Dio, the late great Cozy Powell. I thought it would be a bit of fun to talk about Long Live Rock and Roll today. So let's have a tune from Long Live Rock and Roll. We'll come right back and say hello to the one and only Bob Daisley. There you go, dear listener. Always a pleasure to have Bob on the show. A lovely fella. For Fact's Sake is his book. Jump onto bobdaisley.com. It is an exceptional book, a great piece of history, and if you're an Australian, you should be very proud of the work that Bob Daisley has done. He has played in studios and on stages with musicians that no other Australian has done, and I take my hat off to him. He's a wonderful fella and a wonderful character, and it was a lot of fun having a chat about Long Live Rock and Roll, one of my favourite Richie Blackmore albums. I really think the first three Rainbow albums are just magnificent. Although I do love the other stuff with Jolene Turner, and also the album he made, of course, Back to Earth Down to Earth, wasn't it? With Jolene Turner, and also with Jolene Turner and with Graham Bonnet. But to me, the Dio lineup, the three Dio lineups were something special. So I hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again on Sitting in a Bar in Adelaide next week, same time. We will do it all again. Love to hear from you. AdelaideRockshow@gmail.com. If you saw Rainbow in Australia in 1976, albeit that we didn't have the pleasure of having Bob Daisley in the band then, but I was too young and I didn't go to the show, and it's one of those things that I've regretted ever since I was only, I think, 12 years old or something. So, but I would have loved to have gone. Apparently it was a fantastic show at the Festival Theatre here in Adelaide. Love to hear from you. Drop me a line. Until next week, have a great one. Peace and love. Morning, Bob. Michael Persh from Adelaide.
Hey, Michael. How you going?
I'm very well, mate. Hey, how are you today?
Fine. All right, yeah.
How's the life of a best-selling author treating you?
Well, not quite best-selling yet, but it's being received very well. It's I've had nothing but good comments, good feedback, and good reviews as well.
Excellent, and most deserved, mate. As I said in our emails previous to our chat today, I've just finished reading it. Loved every minute of it. What I really like too, mate, and you explained it to me last time we spoke, but it didn't really sink in till I had a hard copy in my hand.
Right.
The way it's put together, the quality of the way the book is made and assembled, the shiny pages. It's not just a throwaway book. It's a beautiful piece to keep forever.
Well, yeah, with for fact's sake, you know, with a title like that, I suppose I have to have something to back the title up in not just being as factual as it could be, but making a statement that it was a good quality product, you know. So, you know, there were options with the cover, there were options with the type of paper and all that, but I chose the best quality paper, the 30-gram silk, you know, because there were lots of photographs throughout the text, and you have to have very good, you know, gloss paper to hold the photographs, and the cover had an option as well to have the. It's got a sort of, I don't know how you describe it, like a rubbery effect, and I chose to have that on there, and that printing company are the only company that does that. So yeah, I wanted the best quality product, and I don't think that, you know, there are some people that don't realise the size and weight of the book and quality of it until they get it in their hands. And I've lost count of how many people, when they see it for the first time, have said, "Oh, wow!" And that's, you know, that's exactly what they say.
When I picked mine up from the post office, I did actually think that someone may have popped a brick into the bag as well.
Yeah, well, it's just under 3 pounds in weight. So, and that's because of the, you know, the heavier quality, very good quality paper, and it is not a small book and it's not a thin book. So, 325 pages, 480 something photographs, and good quality stuff. It's just under 3 pounds in weight, which is, yeah, it's like you say, it's like a brick in a box. Yeah.
But also, mate, as you said, having the photograph interspersed through the text is not something you see very often. But I really like that, because as you read the story, you had a picture of, you know, whoever you were talking about or yourself in that situation, and I really enjoyed that, rather than going to a block of photographs in the middle of the book and relating them back to something you have read or something you're about to read.
Well, I always find that frustrating myself personally if I'm reading a book and I have to go searching in the photo section for what I'm reading about. You tend to lose your train of thought, or you know, it kind of ruins the you know, the continuity of reading. It was actually, when I first suggested that I was going to write a book, it was my eldest daughter Rebecca. She said she was the one that brought that up, and I said I couldn't agree more with you. I said, you know, it's searching through photo sections in a book. It's a cheap way of doing it. That's why they do it, because they use cheaper paper for the text and then a bit of gloss paper for a limited photo section in the middle, or a couple of photo sections throughout the book. But it's, you know, for me, it just doesn't do it. And obviously, it costs more to do that. But I wanted the best quality product. So if you're reading about Gary Moore, there's a picture of him. If you're reading about Randy Rhoads or Richie Blackmore, there are pictures through the text, so you see immediately what I'm talking about.
Absolutely. And I don't want to ruin it for people that are about to buy it, but there's a lot of great stories in there that aren't so commonly known about your time in Australia, about growing up, and even, you know, about your time in London before. You know, the hard work, the hard yards you put in London to get a gig, and I found all that really fascinating, and I think people are really going to enjoy that.
Yeah, because, you know, quite often you only see, you know, the good stories, or and it makes it seem like, oh, well, it all just fell in your lap, you know, but it didn't. There was a lot of sacrifice, there was a lot of hard work and determination and encouragement from people around me, and that, until things really did start to come together. And so, you know, I've heard it said in so many words, or between the lines, where people are kind of hinting at, well, it's all right for you, you know, you know, you've done all right, and it just sort of, you were destined to do that. But maybe I was destined to do that, but that doesn't exclude the fact that there was a lot of hard work and sacrifice that went into it.
And that's the overall feeling that I came away after reading the book, Bob, is that, yes, you were very fortunate but you persevered, you put in the hard yards, and when the chips were down, you didn't give up. And I think that's the underlying subtext of the book. And I think for anyone, any musician or anyone in life, that's a very important lesson. Is to, if there's something you want, or even just to keep doing the best you do at whatever it is you do, to keep your head down and do that. And I think that's a very important lesson that I really got out of your book.
Well, that's good, because it's like I tried to make that an example of, if you want to do something, then go for it, but you've got to give it your all. And people ask me sometimes, what would you advise people to do that want to get on, whether it's in music or whatever. And that, I think that's certainly one of the main ingredients is determination and tenacity. And you do have to make a certain amount of sacrifice as well. I remember as a kid, my dad used to say to me, there's only one way to do anything, and that's probably. No half-heartedness and no giving up, and you just get on with it and you do it until you've done your best. And my mum used to say, you can only do your best, because I used to worry about, school exams or certain things that were happening in my life, and she used to say to me, look, just do your best. If you've done your best, you can do no more, but you must do your best. And that stuck with me as well.
Absolutely. And so here we are today. I thought it was a great opportunity to have a chat about Long Live Rock and Roll, the Rainbow album, because apart from it being the 35th anniversary this year, when I was reading your book, I was thinking, now, the first time that I saw your name, because I was only a kid when Long Live Rock and Roll came out, and Rainbow, Deep Purple had sort of faded into the distance. So I grew up with Rainbow, and I loved the first album, loved Rainbow Rising. So when the third album came out, I remember seeing your name, but it was only, I think, a few years later that I read something in a rock and roll magazine that the penny dropped that you were an Australian. And from then on I thought, wow, there's an Australian guy that's playing in these bands in the UK that I love. He is the only one that I've ever seen his name pop up, and that's where I started following your career from. So I thought it might be a bit of fun to talk about Long Live Rock and Roll.
Oh, certainly, yeah. It's, God, 35 years. It's that's amazing, isn't it? Just time flies, when you're having fun, I suppose.
Indeed. So
I've heard it said, through different sources and by quite a few people that lineup of Rainbow they called it the classic lineup, which is nice for me to be, recognised that way. I suppose the only real release on DVD is the Live in Munich show that we did that took years and years and years to come out on DVD. It was brought out by my manager Drew Thompson. He's the Deep Purple overseas representative in Melbourne, and that's how he first got in touch with me. He was intending to get that show released on DVD because it had been floating around for a while on VHS tape as a bootleg kind of thing, but the quality, sound and picture was never very good. I'd seen it because originally it was just a German television show. We were just live on German TV, and it wasn't meant to be released on back in those days on tape or later on DVD. But I'm glad that it is, because it's it does show the band as a good live act. I think I'd only been in the band for about 6 weeks or something when we did that. So no, actually less than that.
Well.
But I'm proud of that, and I'm proud to have been in that band, because it was, what a classic band. Richie Blackmore, Cozy Powell, Ronnie James Dio, myself, and David Stone was on keyboards.
The video, the DVD, Bob, is a great document for that time, and even more special now that Cozy and Ronnie are no longer with us. But it is, as you say, I think the only document of that lineup of the band. But I think, although I love the other versions of Rainbow, the first three albums to me were very special albums. There was I think it was just some special chemistry with Ronnie and Richie.
Oh, for sure, without a doubt. Yeah. Well, as you probably read in my book, there was one time in when was it, 1975, beginning of 75, when Richie Richie was getting ready to leave Deep Purple, and we were on the bill in Germany on a big show, and there was Deep Purple with Richie in it. I was in Chicken Shack, and we were second on the bill to Purple, and Ronnie was in a band called Elf, and they were on the bill as well. So the three of us were at the same show in three different bands. So, but you know, there was a chemistry between Ronnie and Richie for, you know, certainly writing, putting the material together, and that was, I suppose, creating a lot of interest. Like you say, you kind of lost interest in Deep Purple and focused more on Rainbow, and that was probably because of the Richie and Ronnie thing, you know, because Ronnie was such a great singer, and Richie Blackmore was the you know, he was the magnet for Deep Purple. And so when he formed his new band Rainbow, there was a lot of interest created in it.
It's interesting when I look at the DVD, Bob, that you know, for you to be in the band for such a short time, there's a lot of material to learn there, mate. You must have really worked hard.
Oh yes, yeah, I did. You know, when I first joined the band, it was at the end of a Widowmaker tour. We'd toured America, and at the end of the tour, a mate of mine that I'd worked with in another band, Mungo Jerry, Dick Middleton, his name was, he introduced me to Richie because he was a mate of Richie's, and that was when he said that Rainbow was looking for a bass player. So they'd auditioned something like 40 bass players or something, but Richie was very particular, you know, and so I went down to audition, and Ronnie and Cozy and Richie went off into an office and had a little chat, came back out and said, well, you've got the gig if you want it. But, well, see, I was in Widowmaker, and I had to consider the whole situation, and I actually said to them, I'll think about it. So they must have thought, who's this jumped-up little fuck? You know? But I did. I had to give it some thought, you know, and eventually, you know, well, the whole story's in the book, but eventually I did join Rainbow not long after that. But yes, there was a lot of material to learn, and like I say, Richie was very particular in how it was, you know, all performed and arranged and all that. So yeah, there was a lot to do, and I used to sit in my hotel room in the Sunset Marquee in LA with tapes of the songs and rehearsals and that, and practice and learn and that. And the very first show that we did live at the beginning of the tour was in Stockholm in Sweden. And I remember after that show, I mean, you know, there's a certain amount of apprehension and concern and worry, because my very first show with a, you know, first really big name act that I'd been in. You know, I'd had quite a bit of experience, but that was the first big name act that I'd been in, and obviously the spotlight's on me because I've, you know, got to prove myself. But it went very well, and after the show, Richie actually said to me, well done, you obviously did your homework, so I was pleased about that. And yes, there was a lot to learn.
We spoke about it before, but your time in Widowmaker, and it, as you said, you talk about it in the book, but I found that very interesting, your loyalty to the band, although, you know, reading the trials and tribulations, it sounds like it was hard work, but you did really find it hard because you had a loyalty to those guys.
Oh, that was it. You know, it was a democratic situation, and I would be leaving a democratic situation to go into Rainbow as a, you know, I had to face it. It was like kind of as a sideman, you know, but it was a stepping stone. It was an important stepping stone, and I've always, you know, kept a certain amount of loyalty to whoever I was working with, which is why when I was offered the Black Sabbath thing when I was working with Gary Moore, I turned it down because I was loyal to Gary and I was happy with Gary, you know. And it was the same with Widowmaker. If there hadn't been such silliness, and well, you read the daft stories of stuff that happened and that, you know, I probably, you know, I may have stayed with Widowmaker, but the offer of Rainbow and to go into that at that particular time was just too important to turn down, which is why I didn't. But as you read in the book, the decision was kind of made for me, and that was a bit of a relief.
I get the impression from reading the book and from the conversations that we've had that you and Richie really did get on very well, and the general consensus in the press over years has been that in general Richie is not an easy person to get on with, and I don't think you found that from what I'm hearing.
No, he had the reputation as being moody and cantankerous and difficult and all those other adjectives that could describe him, and I suppose to some people, in some ways, he was, or could be. But, I treated the situation as, get on with the job. It's a good opportunity. Put your head down, get on with it. Don't rock the boat. And, and plus I respected Richie as a player and as a person, and maybe I understood him a bit better than other people did. I don't know, but I got on fine with him. I didn't have a problem, and we never ever had a fallout or a crossword.
Mm. And I found it really interesting, in hindsight, looking at having David Stone in the band at that time. For me, the Rainbow Rising with Tony Carey behind the keyboards was a very more keyboard orientated album than certainly Long Live Rock and Roll, and David seemed to be a bit pushed into the background. Was that your feeling on how the lineup of Long Live Rock and Roll was?
Well, I don't know. Richie seemed to have a little bit of a problem with keyboard players. I don't know if I was imagining it, but it seemed to be like they weren't his favourite animal, so maybe by that time, I know he had some weird experiences or difficult experiences with Tony Carey, and Richie used to like to play practical jokes, and there were quite a few sort of almost attacks on Tony Carey, but with David Stone there were some funny vibes between Richie and him as well. So, but I must say that in the song Gates of Babylon on Rock and Roll, on Long Live Rock and Roll, David Stone wrote that brilliant intro and wrote the big majestic section in the middle. And they just said, look, we want to buy this off you. So they paid him out, but they didn't put his name on it. And I think he should have had his name put on it at least as a writing credit, because that was an important part of that song, but he didn't even get the writing credit. So he got paid for writing that section. But I thought it was a bit sad, I suppose, that his writing credit, because, that's a huge part of that song,
Yes, indeed. Well, was that a frustration for you, Bob? Your reputation and as a writer, I think it's well known that you came in when most of Long Live Rock and Roll was pretty well written and recorded. But was it sad for you that you didn't go on to make another album with that lineup, that you could have had some input into songwriting? Me personally, I would have loved to have seen how you guys worked together songwriting wise.
Well, I think because the Richie and Ronnie thing was a bit of they kind of monopolised the songwriting situation, because they were pretty self-proficient, they didn't really need input from anyone else, and they had pretty set ways in how they wanted things to sound. So, Richie was definitely the riff merchant and the songs as far as music went. And Ronnie had such great melodies and wrote all his own lyrics. So there wasn't that much of a sort of, what's the word, opportunity, I suppose, other than occasionally, like the part in Gates of Babylon that David Stone wrote. The rest was all down to Richie and Ronnie and the direction that they really wanted to go in. Plus, at that time, I didn't have that much of a reputation as writing prolifically, because I'd written a couple of songs on the first Widowmaker album, quite a few on the second Widowmaker album, but I hadn't done anything that had gone huge or anything. So they were renowned for their songwriting, and it would have been nice to do another album and do the whole thing together, but I think that it would have, the situation probably would have remained the same, where Ronnie and Richie just did the majority of the writing.
Well, was that a frustration or a strange situation to be in, where you just went in pretty much after the fact, as I understand it, and did some bass parts? And there's a great quote in the book that a few bass parts that Richie played that I think you said that. As a guitar player, Richie Blackmore, or as a bass player, Richie Blackmore makes a great guitar player. Which just
that's it. I think there's a certain, I don't know, a certain approach that is really, really. You have to be a bass player to really get it, and some guitarists get away with it. Like Paul McCartney started you know, if you're a guitarist and you remain a guitarist, it's just, I don't know, they just don't seem to play bass the same as a bass player does. So, I mean, you know, Richie could play a bass quickly and whip round the neck, but I think the approach and the choice of notes and how you did it is just different unless you are a bass player.
Mm-hmm. Did you get Martin Birch produced Long Live Rock and Roll and has a huge reputation with Purple and lots of other bands? Did you get to work with him much?
Oh yeah, when we went to Le Chateau in France to put down the tracks that I played on, yeah, he was there, and we worked together in the studio, and that I had to put the bass on Kill the King after they'd already done the guide guitar tracks and drum tracks, and I think probably a guide vocal and that, which was the first time I'd done that, and it was a bit weird. Sit in the control room and play to a track that was already done. You know, that thing up until that point, you know, things had never been done that way. Bands played together in the studio, you know, which is how we did Gates of Babylon. We all just sat in the studio together and played it through and played it as a sort of live band. But yeah, working with Martin, he was a nice bloke, and he'd done, I think maybe he was only engineer, but he did one of my favourite albums, which is the Jeff Beck group, Beckola.
Oh, okay, yes.
And he worked on that, which was, yeah, it still remains one of my favourite, or certainly one of my favourite Jeff Beck albums. The two Jeff Beck albums that I think are the best are these first two, Truth and Beckola, with Ronnie Wood on bass and Rod Stewart singing, and it was when he's doing his rock blues stuff, you know.
Yes, indeed. I had the great pleasure of seeing him last time he was in Australia, and my jaw was on the ground for most of the evening. It was wonderful.
Brilliant. You know, I used to call him Jeff Best.
I just wanted to touch on Kill the King, because you mentioned that. That was an interesting tune, because it was in the Rainbow Live repertoire for so long before the guys recorded it, and it was very strange to hear a recorded version after being so familiar with the live version. Had you come across, I guess, working the way you were, you may not have heard that before it was actually recorded?
Oh no, I did hear it, because I had to learn that song live set before we went in and recorded it, you know. So I had heard the live version, and it was a bit strange that they do a song for so long on stage without having recorded it, but yeah, I think the recording turned out well. I mean, you know,
absolutely, people
love that song.
Yes, and I agree. I think it's one of the classic Rainbow tunes. So, did you have much scope to come in and you know, because Jimmy Bain had played on that for so long and had been recorded on the live album, did you have much scope to put your stamp on the bass playing for Kill the King, for instance?
Oh yeah. I had a fairly free hand on you know, what I could do within reason, sort of thing. Like I say, Richie was quite particular about how things sounded and how they were arranged and what you played and all that. But I had a reasonably free hand to do what I wanted.
And it was, I guess, a great disappointment for lots of us here in Australia. And I was 12 years old when Rainbow Rising, when the band toured Australia, and I couldn't get there, and it's been a regret all my life. But, you know, subsequent lineups of the band and yourself in the next one didn't come out to Australia. And did that sort of cross your mind that I'd love to take this huge band that I'm in, a world-class band, and show my mates back in Australia?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, so many of the bands that I've been in, you know, whether it be Ozzy or Gary Moore or Rainbow or Uriah Heep or whatever, they've all toured Australia, but not when I was with them. So that was a bit of a disappointment to me, that the timing of coming out here with you know, a big name band back to home territory. But and especially I'm sure my mum would have loved to have seen me in one of those bands. Both my mum and dad have gone now, but she was always very encouraging and very proud of what I did. And, well, my dad was as well, but my mum was when I was a young teenager, and she was very encouraging, and she sort of had a good idea of you know, what I could end up doing.
And there's lots of great moments in the book of you're talking about your support from your mum and dad, and that's, as I said before, that's I found all that really interesting and really encouraging for. Again, I mean that situation where you've got kids that want to do something, and you think, well, maybe I wouldn't do it that way, but you encourage them to follow what they, the path they want to follow.
Well, I was actually quite surprised with some of the reactions and comments and that I've had from people that have read the book, coming into the website or Facebook or whatever, and saying how much they enjoyed the childhood stories. A couple of them even said, "Oh, I wanted more of that," And I thought, well, I'm going to put everything in my whole life, more or less from a musical standpoint, but I've got to put it in from when I was born, what how I grew up, what I went through. And all that, and I thought maybe some people may not be that interested in the childhood bits, but so far they've been really interested in it. And like I say, one person, or a couple of them, actually said, "I wish there'd been more childhood stories." I mean, some of the childhood stories are pretty funny.
Oh, and they are, mate. But also, I found it's a little snapshot of Australia in the time you grew up, and there's a few guys, musical guys that have written biographies based in Australia. Mark Evans, for example, who ended up being in AC/DC for a while. Same thing, a snapshot of where he grew up in Melbourne. I found fascinating because it's just a part of time, and it's a little bit of Australian culture that you see in a different context when a famous name writes about their childhood. So it is fascinating.
Oh, for sure, and it's nice for people to get a glimpse of life in those days too, because so much has changed, and especially for younger people, whether they're in their 20s, even 30s, and that's when they were born, things had changed by that time so much, and I read, the Australian comedian Kevin Bloody Wilson.
Yes, don't work.
He's got the same birthday as me, February the 13th, and I think he was maybe born either a year or two before or a year or two after. Actually, I think a year or two after me. But he lived just down the road from me in the western suburbs. So, he talks about similar things to what I talk about in my book of those days in that era, and in that area as well.
We've spoken about Ronnie a bit, but I just wanted to speak about Cozy as well because he's no longer with us. He's one of the most unique drummers that I've ever heard. He plays behind the beat, but you and him had something special together. You played not just in Rainbow together, but there was a real magic between you two.
Yeah, it took me a little bit of getting used to with playing with Cozy, because when I first joined, a couple of weeks I'm talking about, but when I first started playing with him, he was a bit different to many other drummers that I'd played with, because he kind of pushed in parts, which made it obviously exciting, and pulled back in other parts, and sometimes he'd come out of a fill and sort of almost cut the corner kind of thing, and it took a little bit of getting used to, but once I got used to it, we became the driving force behind the band, and it was always a pleasure to play with Cozy, because he was very precise, and he was very energetic, and he was he had real spark to his playing, and the aggression as well. It was, what a rock drummer should have.
Absolutely. And one of the parts in the book that I maybe had forgotten about or reminded me when I read it was about the time of Cozy's death. You guys were seriously talking about putting Rainbow back together, and that would have been such a wonderful thing, but unfortunately not to be.
Yeah, there was some serious talk going on. I'd spoken to Ronnie Dio, I'd spoken to Cozy several times, and Ronnie had spoken to Richie, and the green lights were happening, and it looked like it could go ahead, and it was getting serious. There hadn't been a keyboard player named. I don't know if it would have been Tony Carey or David Stone or even Don Airy, because Don had been in another incarnation of Rainbow.
Yes.
The keyboard player hadn't been settled upon, but the four of us were talking about the reunion. But it's very unfortunate that Cozy was killed right at that time. Right where it was just getting serious about putting it together.
And one one last tune that I just wanted to ask you about, and we've actually spoken about this before, and I know it's not one of your favourite tunes on the album, LA Connection, but for me, you and Cozy have a really lovely groove on this song, and I think that's why I like it. But for me, look, in hindsight, it's a bit of an indication where Rainbow went in the future, and I guess when I look back over Long Live Rock and Roll, it's got, as a sound, it's kind of moving away. I think the first two Rainbow albums had a very English sound, and Long Live Rock and Roll started to have a bit of American sound creep into it. Is that a fair comment?
Well, I don't know. When I heard LA Connection for the first time, it reminded me a little bit of, they're trying to be a bit sort of Bad Company-ish.
Yes.
with the simple sort of, plodding. Not that Bad Company was a plodding band, but I mean the groove in that and the approach to it and the writing structure in that, it just reminded me of maybe something along the lines of what Bad Company would have done. But the funny thing about that song, that was apparently written about Tony Carey, because he wanted it. I think it was when they were at the Le Chateau in France, and Richie was giving him a hard time, and he knew he was going to go. He knew his days were numbered, and he was, trying to get through to LA to arrange his flight home, and that's what Ronnie wrote that about. LA Connection was a phone connection to get through to LA so he could go home.
Interesting story.
Yeah.
Well, there's a couple of things that I just want to finish off with, mate. A couple of stories, and the DVD, I want to hark back to that, because there's a story of Richie being locked up the night before, and I think that just had me in stitches when I read that.
Yeah, well, the whole story's in the book, but what it was, he ended up in jail in Austria, and well, he almost didn't make the gig. That's why we went on late that night. Because we were supposed to go on about, I think there was a band called Kingfish opening up for us. It was a Jet Records band. They used to go on at about sort of 8 o'clock, and then we'd come on at around 9:15. But that night it was Richie had to, once he was let out of prison, he had to be driven all the way from Austria to Munich in Germany, and he sort of got straight out of the car and came on stage, which was amazing, really. Because he'd been I think he'd been in jail for 2 or 3 days.
And I suggest people grab a copy of the book and read the full story, because it really is a laugh.
Yeah.
Maybe Richie wasn't laughing at the time.
That's what I was just going to say. It wasn't so much of a laugh for Richie. But yeah, we ended up going on about, I think it must have been close to midnight that night. But the audience were very good. They waited patiently, and there was only a couple of them, I think, that had to leave because of transport situations, but they all just stayed and waited patiently, and they were very good. So, yeah, that would have to be the night that
the cameras are rolling.
Yeah.
Actually, there's an interesting thing that I remembered again, just to sidetrack from watching the DVD, and I know there was some flack about it in the press when Rainbow first started, saying that Richie was overindulgent, recording himself playing, but that wasn't the case. But he was actually playing into a preamp of an old reel-to-reel tape deck to get the sound that he wanted, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's like a tape echo.
Yeah.
It had nothing to do with recording himself or playing anything back. It was used as like a tape echo. Like an old-fashioned, so to get that sound, it was, yeah.
And I'd totally forgotten about it till I saw the DVD. I thought, I remember the story about that.
Yeah, no, he wasn't recording himself.
The last thing I wanted to ask about, and you talk about it in the book, there's a small credit on on Long Live Rock and Roll, no thanks to Powell. Would you like to elaborate on that a little bit? Because I think that's a funny story.
Well, there were some weird things that happened at Le Chateau, and Richie was certain that it was haunted, and that there were sort of negative, evil forces and powers there, and coming through and doing weird things like, stopping tape machines and switching lights off and doing all sorts of stuff. And he was convinced that the negative entity was Powell, which is it's supposed to be some kind
I've waited 35 years to find out what that meant. Always a pleasure to say hello to you, Bob. It's been a pleasure again today, and I always appreciate your time. And I hope this not just gets people to go back and have another listen to Long Live Rock and Roll, but again to go and grab a copy of For Fact's Sake, because there is lots of lovely stuff in it about things like this that you know are lost in time, and you know, to hear about them from your perspective, I think is just wonderful for us folks here in Australia, and indeed for folks around the world. So
well, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about you know, good old days and my book, For Fact's Sake. And if anybody is interested, they can get it at my website, bobdaisley.com.
The perfect Christmas gift.
Yeah, certainly. Go out and buy it, everyone.
All right, mate. Thank you again so much. Always a great pleasure, and I hope to see it on top of the bestseller list for Christmas, mate.
Well, I hope so. That'll be lovely.
All righty. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, mate. Thanks very much. Cheers.
Cheers, Bob. Bye-bye.
Bye.